Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A new technical directive is coming into place for the Singapore Grand Prix, and Mercedes are hoping it's going to significantly slow Red Bull down. Flexible front wings especially are going to be outlawed by this new technical directive. Red Bull don't believe they're going to get affected significantly by this, neither do Mercedes. Which team might fall foul of this, and if they do, is there going to be any significant performance changes at the top of the field? Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Now first of all, big news. Andretti are expected by AMUS to be granted the license by the FIA to race in Formula 1. There's no real reason for the FIA to deny them. They tick all the boxes of what a new entry should be. They've got the motorsport heritage, they've got the mass backing by General Motors, of course, partnering with Cadillac. So the FIA are like, sure, this ticks the boxes, let's go. The issue is that it's not just the FIA, the governing body, that decides on these things. Formula 1 management, F1 itself, and the teams also have to agree. The other interesting part though, so therefore I thought, right, it's not going to happen, right? Probably the teams don't want to, shall we say, slice the pie into 11 slices rather than 10. That's the fundamental reason why teams don't want to bring in another team. But, you know, when Haas is on the grid, you've got to think that this team is worthy of a spot. Now, the turning point, though, potentially, is with regard to European Union laws that, since 2000 or so, actually make it very difficult to reject a new application. If it's approved by the FIA, which AMUS say for sure it's going to be, F1 have a hard time finding reasons to doubt that, and even the FIA find themselves in a similar position. In 2000, the EU Commission forced the FIA to change its sporting law as part of a directive regarding participation in motorsport events. Article 2 states that participation of a team cannot be prevented or hindered unless the association cites security reasons or has legitimate concerns that such participation would jeopardize fair and orderly proceedings. That seems to be a rather difficult thing to argue in this case. So with that justification, you can't really reject Andretti, and Formula 1 management and the teams would equally have a difficult time doing so. So it gets pretty interesting. So this is maybe the most confident that I felt reading this stuff, that this will happen. Whether it's going to happen immediately, we don't know. There's also the talk about the dilution fee, right? So the idea is under the Concord agreements, there can be a maximum of 12 teams on the grid. There may also be other entries, such as the high-tech entry, approved, but we definitely expect the Andretti bid to get approved. Then it's about how much they might have to pay to get into the sport, as in when you're diluting the pie from 10 slices to 11, the teams want to be compensated for that. The number that's been talked about is 200 million, but that's arguably before a lot of the growth in F1 over the last few years. The number they want today is 600 million to a billion, which is obviously a big deal. But even then, there's a question as to whether such a sum, an increase of that sum, can be legally enforced. So there's a few pointers right now that seem to make it more likely that we are going to get an 11 team on the grid. It's not going to be next year. It'll be 2025 they've entered for, and that will be their target date. It's going to be tough for them to actually turn it around and make that happen, but hopefully they can, and it seems highly plausible this will be possible at the moment. And I think, to be honest, a lot of people are looking for something to make Formula 1 a little bit more exciting, and that would certainly be that. Now, the last couple of days we've talked about Sergio Perez versus Lando Norris, and a reasonable chance that Perez might be ousted for Norris as soon as next year. Now, Norris was actually doing an interview here with race fans and was discussing other options, talking about McLaren, and the general perception was, yeah, I love McLaren, I want to win here, but that's always what the drivers say. He did talk about other teams and says that, well, Red Bull, there's always some changes going down there behind the scenes, and he, obviously the quote that they decide to title the article with is, I owe McLaren a lot, but not my life, i.e., you know, I'm not going to stay here forever, which definitely makes you think that there could be some plausibility behind this. And Nico Rosberg seems to think it's happening, so I guess time will only tell whether they can come to an agreement such as that. Now, one of the big talking points going into Singapore is, well, firstly, if Verstappen continues winning, that'll be his first win in Singapore, but also this is the track that Red Bull have said if we win here, we're going to win them all. But, you know, they're not 100% sure yet that Singapore is going to be a victory for them, but it probably will be. They won last year with Perez, of course. Now, one of the changes that is being made is a technical directive coming into place. We talked about this a few days ago on what the FIA, the governing body, are considering to be flexible wings, especially the front wings. And, you know, teams have noted that they've been somewhat bendy, shall we say. Now, they're allowed to flex to some degree within the regulations. The difficulty is, how much are they allowed to flex? The Mercedes goes from here to here. I mean, you can just, I guess I'll just click between the two of them. You guys can see the difference between when it's at full speed and when it's, you know, this is, I guess, no speed at all in the pit lane. This is in a different scenario. And we also have some comparisons, I guess. Let's just have a look at the Red Bull. This is the Red Bull at speed around Zandvoort, and this is the Red Bull in the braking zone. So you guys can see, I'll just make sure I click between this to kind of get the picture right. There's some flexibility here in this front wing. Is this flexibility beyond what is meant to be allowed? That's a difficult question to answer. This is the Ferrari, for example. It goes from this to looking like this, so there's some flexibility in the Ferrari wing. There's some flexibility in the Mercedes wing as well, from this image to this image. Actually quite significant on Mercedes, but Mercedes say that they're not concerned about this. They reckon their wing falls squarely within what is allowed under the regulations. The issues that the FIA run into is that the teams can, when they're doing the testing for how flexible the wing is on, shall we say, like dry land in a testing scenario, they are able to engineer the wings to behave differently in those tests than they do actually on the track itself. So certain wing designs we probably won't be seeing at Singapore and beyond because they overstep the mark in terms of what's allowed. So Toto Wolff, of course, has said, as, let's be honest, he said, for what, TD39. That came into effect last year, and the belief was that the flexi floors that Red Bull and Ferrari were supposedly using to gain advantage were being outlawed, and therefore it was going to slow Red Bull and Ferrari down. It pretty much did slow Ferrari down, but it didn't make any difference to Red Bull, the kind of flexi floor outlawing. And this time we're talking about Flexi-Wings. But I think it was quite clear last year that Red Bull and Ferrari were the two teams using those flexi floors to their advantage. Whereas this time it's not so clear who, if anyone, is using the Flexi-Wings. Possibly Aston Martin. There was talk that even at the start of this season, Aston Martin were basically told, look, that's a bit over the line. You're going to have to bring a new front wing there. And now they want to take a step further. So Toto Wolff says it would be nice, as I'm sure it would for Mercedes and for their competitors, for Red Bull to be a bit slower. Half a second slower would be lovely. But I don't think that's going to be the case. Probably Wolff is learning his lesson from what happened previously when they thought they were going to be catching up significantly. George Russell made the point at the time back in 2022, and it's obviously not happened, as it. Red Bull have, firmly beyond that solidified their advantage. So Christian Horner says it's not going to affect them at all. Now, you wouldn't expect, if a team thinks it's going to affect them, they wouldn't really say so, and they're not going to come out right and say, yep, we think we're going to get screwed by this, guys, unlucky, it's been a good time at the top, you know, they're not going to say that. So you can read into Horner's comments like you will, but as he says, it's not something that affects us. We've seen a few rubbery nose boxes kind of saying that other teams are going to have these issues addressed, I guess, in Singapore. So almost saying that we're going to get even stronger relative to our competition because we're not abusing this as much as other teams are, which, who knows who's right on this. So Red Bull say no issues at all, and kind of implying that their front wing designs have therefore been approved. But I'm pretty sure it was as of in the last couple of days that the front wing design had to be submitted for approval to the FIA, and the decision will be made in short order, I suppose, as to what front wing they can actually run come the main event in Singapore. So things that could still change, and there's been some reporting here from Formula Uno that says that Red Bull are, they're not massively concerned. There is also a minor update they're bringing to the Grand Prix, which is going to be interesting to see if that takes them even further ahead, which frankly it probably will. And Red Bull say there is no big concern for the way things currently stand. And according to Formula Uno, Mercedes aren't expecting anything different either. So Mercedes reckon they'll be fine. Red Bull reckon they're going to be fine. We don't really know what Ferrari or Aston Martin's opinion of this is. And as TD39 did, it might affect the performance of some of these teams. But frankly, it's not going to be doing much, is it, to stop the dominance of Red Bull and Max Verstappen? We would well believe, unless Toto Wolff's theory of half a second is correct. But even then, I mean, the Red Bull is so good in so many aspects that even a small discrepancy in the front wing, that's not going to override so many of the other beneficial aspects that car has, especially especially suspension geometry, the floor design, all of this good stuff that the Red Bull has on offer. Now, just before we close out, I did think there were some interesting quotes coming out from the owner of Liberty Media, well, let's say from Liberty Media themselves, who own Formula One, discussing the challenge that this poses, the Verstappen dominance. And I thought some very telling comments here, actually, where Greg Maffei says, Stefano Domenicali is rightly trying to pivot, and now he says, come and watch this historic event. You've never seen success like this, you've never seen dominance like this, you don't want to miss it. Which is pretty much the way that it's, you know, that things have pivoted, right? The general perception seems to be from Formula One and from some of the media that, wow, this is a historic season, you know, you've got to come and watch dominance. Now, you know, for Formula One fans that have been around for decades or even, you know, 5-6 years, you'll know what it's like, you know, if it's pretty competitive for second place, that can be entertaining at times. But I think the issue that Formula One are running into now is that the massive growth that's been achieved over the last few years through, let's say, Drive to Survive and big promotions in America, it's not, a lot of those fans don't have the same perception that a lot of like old school Formula One fans have that have seen and expect periods of dominance. They see the same driver winning every weekend, as it presently is, and one team absolutely dominating the championship, and don't see it too much of a reason to tune in, and you can't necessarily blame them. Frankly, the sport at the moment is highly predictable. Not to say that I don't still find it enjoyable to watch, but it is way more predictable and, frankly, less enjoyable to watch as it would have been in a highly competitive season like 2021. So, and it's not just the first time Liberty Media were saying this, right? They said the same thing back in 2019 when Mercedes continued dominating. Liberty Media took over in like 2017. So, you know, they saw Mercedes win again and again, and they were like, damn, what are we going to do about this? But I think nowadays, it's even more of a big issue because the sport has grown somewhat. There's lots of new fans coming in, and I'm not sure they're really going to buy this idea from Stefano Domenicali that, wow, this dominance is so impressive, I've got to tune in every week to see Verstappen keep racking up the wins. I don't really think that's going to fly with a lot of the newer audience, and I don't think we can blame them for thinking that way. So then it kind of brings on to the question as to whether changes could be made or forced through, or let's say pushed by Liberty Media. We heard rumours a couple of months ago now that Liberty Media are trying to get the top teams to have two alpha drivers, as it were. So even if there is a dominant car, there's at least a fight for the championship, as we saw with Mercedes 2014 through to 2016, which maybe is interesting. And maybe they could also say, look, FIA, just like you did to Mercedes with several changes that were made over that period to slow Mercedes down and take away some of their advantage, try and do the same thing for Red Bull. But even then, it might be a massive challenge to even try and do that with Red Bull because their car is just good everywhere. Like, if you restrict one of the elements that makes the Red Bull car good, I don't really think it changes like how good their car is relative to the competition because they've got advantages in like every other aspect. But yeah, just an interesting couple of comments there that were emerging over the last several days. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.